In 1924, the most powerful nations on earth handed their financial future to a banker from Illinois. His name was Charles Dawes. He was not an economist. He was not a diplomat. He was not elected by anyone in Europe. He was the founder of the Central Trust Company of Illinois, a commercial bank in Chicago. And the system he designed, the one they named after him, the one they gave him a Nobel Prize for, the one that made him Vice President of the United States, created the single most dangerous financial dependency in modern history. Here is how it worked. Wall Street would lend money to Germany. Germany would use that borrowed money to pay reparations to Britain and France. Britain and France would use those reparation payments to repay their war debts to the United States. And then Wall Street would lend more money to Germany, and the circle would begin again. American banks collected interest on the loans going out, and they collected repayment on the debts coming back. They were earning from both ends of the same money going round in a circle. They called it a peace plan. They gave it a Nobel Prize. It was a money machine. And when it collapsed in 1929, it did not just destroy Germany. It destroyed the economic foundations of every country that had been plugged into the circuit. And it created the precise conditions, unemployment, hunger, desperation, rage, that brought Adolf Hitler to power. The man who designed it won the Nobel Peace Prize and became Vice President of the United States in the same year. This is that documented story. Before we go further, drop where you are watching from in the comments right now. I want to know which countries are following this money trail. And stay to the end, because everything in this video is sourced from congressional hearings, Senate investigations, and Nobel Prize Committee records. Every name, every dollar, every loan. To understand what Dawes built, you have to understand what existed before he arrived. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles declared Germany solely responsible for the First World War. The Allied nations, Britain, France, Belgium, Italy, demanded compensation. The Reparations Commission calculated the bill at 132 billion gold marks. That is approximately $31.5 billion in 1921 currency. In today's terms, it would exceed $500 billion. Germany could not pay it. The economy had been shattered by 4 years of war. The industrial base was damaged. The workforce was depleted. The merchant fleet had been surrendered. Colonies had been stripped. And the amount demanded was not calculated based on what Germany could afford. It was calculated based on what the Allies wanted to receive. The economist John Maynard Keynes resigned from the British delegation at Versailles in protest. He wrote that the reparations demands would destroy the European economy. He was ignored. But here's the part that is rarely taught. Britain and France were not demanding reparations because they were angry. They were demanding reparations because they were in debt. During the war, the United States had loaned more than $10 billion to the Allied governments. Britain owed the most. France owed nearly as much. And Washington made one thing absolutely clear. Those debts would be repaid in full. No forgiveness, no cancellation, no exceptions. Britain tried to link the two obligations. In 1922, the Balfour Note stated that Britain would only seek reparations from Germany and debt repayments from its European allies in an amount equal to what Britain owed the United States. In other words, if America canceled Britain's debt, Britain would cancel everyone else's. The whole system could have been unwound in a single diplomatic agreement. Washington refused. The United States insisted that reparations and war debts were separate matters, that Germany's obligation to France had nothing to do with France's obligation to America. This was technically true. It was also financially absurd, because in practice the money could only flow in one direction, from Germany westward across Europe and then across the Atlantic to the United States. If Germany could not pay, nobody could pay, and everyone in Washington knew it. By 1923, the system had broken down completely. Germany had defaulted on a timber delivery. France and Belgium responded by occupying the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. German workers went on strike. The government printed money to pay the striking workers, and the currency collapsed into the most extreme hyperinflation in modern history. At its peak, a single American dollar was worth 4.2 trillion German marks. The reparation system was not just failing, it was destroying Europe, and the United States had a problem. If Germany collapsed entirely, if the economy disintegrated and a revolution took hold, the $10 billion Washington had loaned to Britain and France during the war would never come back. The Allies could not repay America without reparations from Germany, and Germany could not pay anyone. The money was stuck, and the man sent to unstick it was a banker. In January of 1924, a committee of financial experts convened in Paris. 2 representatives from each of 5 nations, the United States, Britain, France, Belgium, and Italy. The chairman was Charles Dawes. Dawes was not chosen because he understood European politics. He was chosen because he understood money. He had been the youngest controller of the currency in American history, appointed at 33. He had founded and run one of the largest banks in the Midwest. He had served as chief of procurement for the American Expeditionary Forces during the war, managing the logistics of supplying 2 million soldiers across an ocean. He understood systems. He understood flow. And he understood debt. The committee worked for 3 months. The report they produced, known as the Dawes Report, was presented on April the 9th, 1924. It was accepted by the Allies in Germany on August the 16th. The plan did not reduce the total amount Germany owed. It did not forgive any portion of the debt. What it did was restructure the payment schedule, starting at 1 billion gold marks in the first year and rising to 2.5 billion by 1928. It reorganized the German central bank under foreign supervision. It placed the German railway system and certain industrial revenues under Allied control as guarantees, and it required France and Belgium to withdraw from the Ruhr. But the critical element, the one that made everything else possible, was the loan. The Dawes Plan authorized an initial loan of 800 million gold marks to Germany. Half of that, 400 million marks, was raised through bond issues on Wall Street. J.P. Morgan floated the loan on the American market. It was oversubscribed within hours. American investors, pension funds, insurance companies, ordinary savers looking for yield, were fighting to lend money to a country that had just experienced the worst hyperinflation in history. Why would they do that? Because the Dawes Plan guaranteed them something extraordinary. Under the terms of the plan, repayment of commercial debts took priority over reparation payments. If Germany had to choose between paying back Wall Street and paying reparations to France, Wall Street came first. The bankers were guaranteed first position in the queue. Every other creditor, including the governments of Britain and France, stood behind them. This single clause transformed German sovereign debt from the riskiest investment in Europe into one of the safest. Wall Street was lending to a government that was legally obligated to pay its bankers before it paid its war debts. The entire weight of the international reparations system, the Treaty of Versailles, the Allied commissions, the diplomatic architecture of post-war Europe sat underneath Wall Street's loans as a cushion. An officer of the House of Morgan was appointed agent general for reparations payments, the man responsible for overseeing the entire financial architecture of the plan. A Morgan banker was placed at the center of the system that a Morgan bank was lending into. He supervised the transfers. He monitored the German budget. He decided when payments could be delayed and when they must proceed. The referee was employed by one of the players. And the loans did not stop at the initial 800 million. Once the Dawes Plan established the framework, once the terms guaranteed Wall Street first position, American capital flooded into Germany, not just government loans but private investment. American banks funded German municipal bonds, industrial expansion, infrastructure projects, and commercial ventures. Over the next 4 years, more than 130 long-term loans were issued to Germany from the United States, and hundreds more short-term loans that could be recalled immediately upon demand. The plan worked immediately. Foreign capital flooded into Germany. The currency stabilized. Industrial production recovered. Unemployment fell. Between 1924 and 1929, German economic output increased by 50%. Germany's share of world trade exceeded its 1913 level, the last full year before the war. Berlin became the cultural capital of Europe. Science, art, architecture, and cinema flourished. The period became known as the Golden Age of Weimar, and the money flowed exactly as designed. Wall Street lent to Germany. Germany paid reparations to Britain and France. Britain and France paid their war debts to the United States. American banks collected interest on the loans going out and collected repayment on the debts coming in. And then they lent more to Germany, and the circle continued. The system was elegant, it was profitable, and it depended entirely on one thing, that American banks never stopped lending. But there was a structural flaw in the machine that Charles Dawes had built, and every banker involved knew it was there. They built it anyway, because the flaw was not a problem for them, it was a problem for everyone else. The loans were short-term. This is the detail that changes everything. The billions of dollars flowing into Germany from Wall Street were not long-term infrastructure bonds locked in for 20 or 30 years. Many of them were short-term commercial loans, callable at any time. If the American economy weakened, if confidence dropped, if Wall Street needed its money back, those loans could be recalled overnight. Germany had built its entire recovery on borrowed money that could vanish with a single telephone call. Between 1924 and 1929, American investors poured capital into Germany at an unprecedented rate. They funded city halls in Hamburg, swimming pools in Munich, and opera houses in Frankfurt. German municipalities competed with each other to attract American loans. borrowing for projects that had nothing to do with industrial recovery because the money was cheap and abundant and nobody was asking what would happen when it stopped. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, reorganized under the Dawes Plan and supervised by foreign officials, repeatedly warned that the level of short-term foreign borrowing was dangerous. Weimar Schacht, the president of the Reichsbank, argued publicly that Germany was becoming addicted to foreign credit. He was overruled. The loans were profitable for the banks that arranged them. The commissions were lucrative, and the appearance of German prosperity served the political interests of every government involved. By 1929, Germany had received 29 billion Reichsmarks in foreign loans. The economy was growing, the factories were running, the cities were rebuilding. But underneath all of it, every mark of growth, every job created, every building constructed, sat a foundation of foreign credit that the lenders could withdraw at will. The German government understood the risk. Gustav Stresemann, the foreign minister who had agreed to the Dawes Plan, knew that Germany was trading sovereignty for stability. He accepted it because the alternative was worse. The Ruhr was occupied. The currency was worthless. The country was on the edge of revolution from both the left and the right. Stresemann chose dependency over collapse. It was a rational decision in 1924. It became a catastrophic one in 1929. And there was a second flaw, equally dangerous and equally deliberate. The Dawes Plan did not set a total amount for German reparations. It structured the annual payments but left the final figure undetermined. Germany was paying into an obligation with no end point. Every year the payments increased. Every year the total owed remained unknown. The plan was designed to keep Germany paying indefinitely, which meant Germany had to keep borrowing indefinitely, which meant Wall Street had a permanent customer. The bankers did not build a system to resolve the debt crisis. They built a system to manage it indefinitely at a profit. In 1929, the committee reconvened under Owen D. Young, the head of General Electric and a member of the original Dawes Committee. The Young Plan attempted to fix what the Dawes Plan had left open. It set the total German obligation at 112 billion Reichsmarks to be paid over 58 years through 1988. It reduced the annual burden. It established the Bank for International Settlements to handle the transfers. But the Young Plan came too late. On October the 29th, 1929, 5 months after the Young Plan was proposed, the American stock market crashed. If this is your first time on this channel, this is what we do. We follow documented financial mechanisms through the archives and show you how money moved nations. Subscribe if this is your kind of history. When Wall Street crashed, the short-term loans were recalled. American banks did not send polite letters requesting gradual repayment. They pulled their money, overnight, without warning, without negotiation. The loans that had fueled 5 years of German economic growth, the loans that had stabilized the currency, rebuilt the factories, funded the reparations payments that funded the Allied debt repayments that funded the American banking system, were called in. Germany had no reserves. Every mark of growth had been borrowed. There was no domestic savings cushion because the hyperinflation of 1923 had already destroyed private savings once. The German public had rebuilt their financial lives on the foundation of foreign credit, and that foundation had just been pulled out from underneath them. When the credit disappeared, the economy did not slow down. It collapsed. By 1932, German industrial production had fallen by more than 40%. Unemployment reached 6 million, roughly 1 in 3 of the German workforce. Banks failed across the country. The Reichsmark came under pressure again. The government imposed emergency austerity, cutting wages, cutting benefits, cutting public spending, which made everything worse. The human cost was immediate and visible. Breadlines stretched through German cities. Families who had spent 5 years rebuilding their lives after hyperinflation were now destitute for the second time in a decade. Savings that had been deposited in banks funded by American credit were frozen or lost. The psychological effect was devastating. An entire generation of Germans had now experienced 2 complete economic collapses in 10 years. The first caused by their own government printing money. The second caused by foreign bankers withdrawing it. The promise of the Dawes Plan, that American money would bring stability and peace, had been replaced by a reality that was worse than what had existed before it, because before the Dawes Plan Germany had been poor but independent. After the Dawes Plan Germany had been prosperous but dependent. And after the collapse, Germany was both poor and humiliated, with the added knowledge that its prosperity had been an illusion built on borrowed money controlled by foreign banks, and the circular system collapsed at every point simultaneously. Germany could not pay reparations. Without German reparations, Britain and France could not service their war debts. In 1931, President Hoover declared a 1-year moratorium on all international debt and reparation payments. In 1932 at the Lausanne Conference, the European nations agreed to cancel reparation claims against Germany, and by mid-1933 every European nation except Finland had defaulted on its war debts to the United States. The final accounting is devastating. Germany received 44.7 billion marks in loans and speculative investment. It paid out only 16.8 billion in reparations. The net flow of money had run toward Germany, not away from it. The entire system had transferred wealth from American investors to German industry. And when it collapsed, American investors lost their capital, German workers lost their jobs, and every European government lost the ability to service its debts. The only people who had consistently profited were the banks that arranged the loans, collected the commissions, earned the interest, and charged fees at every stage of the circle. They had been paid first, guaranteed by the terms of the Dawes Plan itself. Commercial debt before reparations. Wall Street before governments. Bankers before nations. Charles Dawes himself was not untouched by the collapse. His own bank, the Central Republic, Bank of Chicago, faced failure during the Depression. In 1932, Dawes was appointed head of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation by President Hoover. He resigned after a few weeks. Shortly after his resignation, the RFC approved a $90 million loan to his own bank, the largest single loan the corporation had made to any institution. The loan was repaid in full, but the optics were unmistakable. The man who had designed the international lending system that collapsed into depression was now receiving the largest government bailout of the era. But the financial collapse was only half the consequence. The other half was political, and it would cost 50 million lives. The economic despair that followed the collapse of the Dawes system created something that no amount of money could repair. In the 1928 German elections, during the Golden Age funded by Wall Street loans, the Nazi Party received 2.6% of the vote. They were irrelevant, a fringe movement with no serious support. In the 1930 elections, 1 year after the crash, they received 18.3%. They had gone from fringe to major party in a single election cycle. In July of 1932, at the depth of the Depression, they received 37.3% and became the largest party in the Reichstag. In January of 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. The connection between the financial collapse and the political catastrophe is not a theory. It is arithmetic. Every percentage point of unemployment translated into votes for extremist parties. Every factory closure, every bank failure, every breadline pushed ordinary Germans toward a man who promised to tear up the Treaty of Versailles, repudiate the reparations, and punish the foreign bankers who had built a system designed to extract wealth from Germany indefinitely. Hitler did not create the conditions that brought him to power. The conditions were created by a financial architecture that was designed in a committee room in Paris by a banker from Illinois, built on short-term loans that could be recalled at any moment, and operated as a circular money machine that enriched Wall Street while making Germany permanently dependent on foreign credit. When the credit was withdrawn, the country broke, and a broken country chose a monster. Hitler's first act as chancellor was to repudiate the reparations. His second was to begin rearmament. The factories that Wall Street loans had rebuilt were converted to weapons production. The industrial capacity that American credit had funded, the steel mills, the chemical plants, the machine works, became the arsenal of the Third Reich. The irony is precise and documented. American money rebuilt the German economy. The collapse of American credit destroyed it. And the industrial base that American loans had constructed was used to build the military machine that would kill American soldiers a decade later. The war that followed killed an estimated 50 million people. It destroyed cities across Europe and Asia. It produced the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others. It divided the world into two armed camps for the next 45 years. It produced the nuclear age. None of this was inevitable. But all of it was predictable by anyone who understood what happens when you build an economy on callable debt and then call it in. In 1934, 1 year after Hitler came to power, the United States Senate established the special committee investigating the munitions industry. It was chaired by Senator Gerald Nye of North Dakota. It became known as the Nye Committee. The committee held 93 public hearings over 2 years. It questioned more than 200 witnesses, including J.P. Morgan himself and members of the DuPont family. It examined the financial connections between Wall Street and the Allied governments before, during, and after the First World War. The findings were devastating. The committee documented that American bankers had loaned more than $2 billion to Britain and France during the war, and that by 1917 those loans were at risk of default because the Allies were losing. The committee found that bankers had pressured the Wilson administration to enter the war in order to protect those loans. America's entry into the war, which cost 117,000 American lives, was driven not by moral principle, but by financial exposure. The testimony was specific. Morgan's bank had acted as the exclusive purchasing agent for Britain and France, facilitating the purchase of more than $3 billion worth of war material and goods. The bank earned commissions on every transaction. When the Allies began to run out of credit in 1917, when private investors could no longer safely loan money to insolvent governments, the Wilson administration faced a choice. Either guarantee the repayment of the Allied loans or watch the shipments of war materials cease. Since the latter would mean Allied defeat and the total loss of Wall Street's investment, there was no real choice at all. The committee concluded that the financial stake had compromised American neutrality long before the formal declaration of war. The loans created an economic interest in Allied victory that made intervention inevitable. DuPont had earned 1,000% profit margins on gunpowder sold to the Allies. Bethlehem Steel had recorded record profits on armaments contracts. Arms manufacturers had lobbied against international disarmament proposals because peace was bad for business. The committee called these companies merchants of death, a phrase that entered the American political vocabulary and never left. And then the committee traced the line forward, from the wartime loans to the post-war reparations system to the Dawes Plan to the collapse. The circular money machine that Dawes had built was not a new invention. It was the continuation of the same financial architecture that had pulled America into the war in the first place. Wall Street had lent to the Allies to finance the war. Wall Street had lent to Germany to finance the peace. And in both cases, Wall Street had collected from every party at every stage, while the risk was carried by governments and the cost was paid by ordinary citizens. The Nye Committee's findings led directly to the Neutrality Acts of 1935 through 1939, laws designed to prevent American bankers and arms manufacturers from ever again dragging the country into a foreign war for profit. The acts prohibited arms sales to belligerent nations. They prohibited loans to nations at war. They were a direct legislative response to the documented evidence that financial interests had compromised American foreign policy. Those laws are now widely regarded as having aided the rise of Nazi Germany by keeping America out of the conflict until it was almost too late. The very laws that were written to prevent the financial manipulation that led to one war may have enabled the conditions that allowed the next one to grow unchecked. The financial system that helped create the conditions for the war also helped delay the response to it. The circle was complete. Charles Dawes won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1925. He was inaugurated as Vice President of the United States the same year. A banker who designed a financial system won the world's most prestigious peace award and the second highest political office in the most powerful country on earth simultaneously. The Nobel Committee citation praised his crucial role in bringing about the Dawes Plan. The committee believed he had saved Europe from another war. In the short term, they were correct. The Dawes Plan ended the Ruhr occupation, stabilized the German currency, and created 5 years of economic growth. In the long term, the system he designed created a dependency so fragile that a single market crash could, and did, unravel the entire European financial order and deliver Germany into the hands of a fascist dictatorship. Dawes himself never acknowledged the connection between his plan and the collapse. He lived until 1951, long enough to see the Second World War, the Holocaust, the Cold War, and the division of the Germany that his plan had been designed to save. He published a journal about his time on the Reparations Commission. He wrote about the logistics of supply chains during the First World War. He never wrote about the short-term loan structure that made his system a ticking bomb. He never addressed the Nye Committee's findings. He never publicly connected the collapse of his financial architecture to the rise of the regime that destroyed Europe. The numbers tell the story without his commentary. Germany received 44.7 billion marks in foreign loans. It paid back 16.8 billion in reparations. American loans to Germany exceeded $3 billion. The Allies only repaid 2.6 billion to the United States in the same period. Wall Street put in more than it received back from the Allies, but it collected interest, bond commissions, underwriting fees, and industrial equity in Germany that made the operation profitable at every stage regardless of whether the circle completed or not. The system was designed so that Wall Street profited whether it worked or whether it failed. If Germany kept paying, Wall Street collected interest. If Germany defaulted, Wall Street had already been paid first under the priority clause. If the entire system collapsed, Wall Street had already extracted its commissions and fees years earlier. The risk was carried by governments. The cost was carried by citizens. The profit was collected by banks. Every country in the system went bankrupt. Every country except Finland defaulted. The banks that designed the circle collected at every stage. The Nye Committee hearings are in the Senate archives. The Dawes report is a published document. The Nobel citation is public record. The loan figures are preserved in the records of the Allied Reparations Commission and the Bank for International Settlements. Roosevelt's moratorium and the Lausanne Conference are documented in the State Department archives. The election results that track the Nazi rise from 2.6% to 37.3% are in the official records of the Weimar Republic. Every number in this video is in the archive. A banker designed a system that looked like peace. It functioned as a money machine. When it collapsed, it produced the worst war in human history. And the man who built it won a Nobel Prize and became Vice President of the United States. That is not a theory. That is a paper trail. If this connected something you were never taught in any classroom, that is exactly what this channel exists to do. Every video on this channel follows the money through the primary source archive. Subscribe if you follow the paper trail. And if you made it this far, leave the word Dawes in the comments so I know who stayed for the full story.